Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in today. Joining me are two gun violence survivors and real-life heroes, Representative Lucy McBath and Marco Vargas, a national leader with Everytown Students Demand Action. Congressman McBath and Marco, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. We're so lucky to have you.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're here to mark the start of National Gun Violence Survivors Week, which is an annual opportunity for us to share survivors' stories. And sadly, there are far too many to tell. A remarkable 58% of Americans have experienced gun violence, either directly or through someone they care about. And there's no question about it. Communities of color are bearing the heaviest burden. All told, nearly 7 in 10 Black and Latino Americans are survivors, and sadly, this scourge is unique to America. More people die from gun violence by early February in the United States than in an entire calendar year in our peer countries. And that's why we chose this week to spotlight survivor stories. Which brings me to my friend, my partner, and my hero, Representative Lucy McBath. Many of you know Lucy as a congresswoman and leader in the gun safety movement, but I know her first and foremost as Jordan's mother. And the way she honors Jordan's life embodies the power of survivors. So Lucy, please tell us how you came to the gun safety movement.
Well, thank you, John, so much. And I'm always so glad to be with my friends and my family, as I call you. And I came to gun safety prevention due to my own tragedy, having lost my son Jordan in November 23rd, 2012 in Jacksonville, Florida, in just what the country has called the loud music killing, when Jordan and his friends were simply playing loud music in their car. They ran across a man who shot 10 rounds into the car because they were playing loud music, wouldn't turn down their music. And we spent a couple of years in a court trying to get justice for Jordan and the boys under the Stand Your Ground law, which Michael Dunn had deemed he was protecting himself. So that was how I became introduced to the really dangerous extremist gun culture that we're living in right now, and understanding the Stand Your Ground laws and all the very dangerous gun laws and culture that we're living in. And that is how I began to speak out and advocate for gun safety with Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and then also taking on the fight for keeping our families and communities safe into Congress.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Of course, you know, you and I have talked about your story before, and certainly have spent much time talking about Jordan. But I have to say, as the parent of two teenage girls, I'm always in awe of your courage. Of course, though, this, as Lucy and I both know, this is not just a movement of parents, because one of the most important developments of the last few years is that young people are also joining this effort. And I think, and Lucy, I think you would agree, when more young people join, it just quickens the pace of generational change. Absolutely. And Marco is a perfect example of that. Marco is the founder of South Central LA Students Demand Action. He's an alum of the National Students Demand Action Advisory Board. He's the founder of the Students Demand Action Summer Leadership Academy program. And in his spare time, he fits in being a student at Dartmouth. So like Lucy, Marco's story is the story of courage, because he has lived with the threat of gun violence for as long as he can remember. And Marco, can you please share with us what brought you here today?
Yes, thank you so much. To me, the gun violence prevention movement is really personal to me. When I was 5 years old, I became a gun violence victim, and unfortunately it was at the hands of my own biological father. Both of my parents are undocumented. They're from Guatemala, and I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, predominantly Hispanic community. And so to me, my childhood, with my biological father, he was an irresponsible gun owner who purchased a weapon on the black market. And he used this gun to harass my mom and forced her to clean and cook and raise his two children, including myself. And I don't remember much of this childhood memory, right? Because I chose to block it for a long time. But as I grew up, I realized that there was this dark kind of period in my childhood that I needed to make sense of, and I'm so grateful to be here today, because in my work in Students of Man Action, I've been able to finally find a community to help me cope with childhood trauma and really feel a sense of empowerment that I haven't had before.
Marco, thank you for sharing, and once again, these are the stories of courage, and you're hearing them right now. Lucy, hard not to ask you to shift to Washington, because just last month you were on Capitol Hill when it was stormed by far-right extremists, some of whom were armed. Just share with us what it was like that day, and also tell us whether you think that living through an armed insurrection will impact how some of your colleagues vote, or whether it will change their attitudes about the issue of gun safety and gun violence.
Most certainly, John. I mean, it was an extremely frightening day. It was almost surreal. I and my colleagues couldn't believe the insurrection and the armed insurrection and things that were happening within our own capital, where we work, where democracy, abides. And at the time, I was preparing to go down onto the floor in the Capitol to debate on behalf of Georgia's elections when everything started to happen and alarms were going off and everything. But I was in a secure location during all of this. I and my staff were safe. We did have to take precautions, of course. But when I saw my colleagues on the floor, when I saw my colleagues hiding, on television, hiding from the insurrectionists, trying to break in, I was completely just shocked and mortified. And the same fear and the same horror that I felt when I even found out that, Jordan had been murdered, it just came reeling back. And I couldn't understand how had we come to this point, and how were these insurrectionists able to come in and bring, weapons, so to speak, to really just, to harm legislators, and to do it as they believed that they were, trying to take democracy back. It's the same fear and the same horror that far too many people and Americans, experience across the country every single day from unnecessary gun violence. And in fact, we know that over half the American adults have either, experienced gun violence themselves, or they've cared for, someone that's experienced it. But it was, it was really just a very frightening time. And what I have to honestly say is that I think when people talk about the fact that, they know gun violence exists, they know that we're in a dangerous culture, they're still somewhat removed from it because it hasn't happened to them. So in response to your question, in terms of what I think it will do in terms of enhancing our ability to be able to pass gun safety legislation, because now my own colleagues have experienced some sense of that danger that this extremist culture continues to bring upon us. I'm absolutely sure that we now are forced to find ways through policy to not only identify this, we've identified the problems that we have with our gun laws, but now to make sure that we are placing pressure to get it done, to pass these pieces of legislation that will keep our families safe. I just had discussions with Speaker Pelosi and also discussions with Leader Hoyer about this very thing, asking, now we know that there's existential threat to all of us, not just in, communities anymore. Now there's a threat to democracy. Now there's a threat with insurrectionists bringing, arms into the Capitol. And now more than ever, we have to make sure that we are protecting our communities and our family. And we've got to make sure that we're passing this very vital legislation. So it is going to happen. There is an urgency now that I think there may not have been before. And I have been told, and I believe this is going to happen, it will come to fruition this year. I know that we will see legislation on the floor, H.R. 8, H.R. 1112, and maybe the assault weapons ban, but we will be moving these pieces of legislation because we have to.
Yeah, it's amazing how something that you can sort of act as if it doesn't touch you, and then suddenly it's touched really every member of Congress. Marco, after the Capitol Hill insurrection, metal detectors were installed outside the doors of the House chamber, and some lawmakers, as we've all read in the newspapers or heard on TV, are absolutely up in arms about it. But it made me think about the fact that actually metal detectors are business as usual and have been for many years for millions of students who have to go through metal detectors to enter school every single day. And that brings me to this question. How has America's gun violence crisis shaped your generation?
Yeah, well, first, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, I'm so sorry about what happened, in Congress. It's just like, it's horrifying as a young person to see that, something like that would happen. I'm definitely disappointed, right, in the state of our country, right? I'm disillusioned. And unfortunately, it's something that throughout my life, it's carried, the normalization of gun violence is a conversation that I have oftentimes with my friends where, growing up in South Central Los Angeles and in by extent in communities like mine that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence, metal detectors, police with guns, violent events occurring just outside your house, right, down my block. I know it happens all the time. Helicopters at night, dogs barking, right, loud, mysterious noises that you don't know if it's a firework. You wish it's a firework, it's not. And so, to me, I think the event that happened in Capitol Hill is really a reminder that everyday gun violence is a reality, and it's a conversation that we do need to have. As a young person, I do think that, and I wish that that more legislators like you, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, would listen, right? And it makes me so excited when legislators do listen. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad that not only do we some of the conversations I have with my friends right now is like, no, gun violence does not have to be normalized, but it's something that we can take action on, right? And I saw that in 2020 during the election cycle. We went and got out the vote, and we showed that like our voice matters, and that not only do we want our perspectives to be heard, but we also want to see it at the table. And so I'm really excited about that trend where I do see a lot of young people running for office. And I do see that the next few years being positive for gun safety and just in general for young people in politics.
Yeah, there's no question about it, Marco. When we see young people get involved, run for office, be politically active, it really gives people from my generation and Lucy's really a sense of hope and really a sense that the political calculus will change as the generations change. Lucy, we talked about the fact that the insurrection may have had an impact on people's perception on the Hill about gun violence and gun safety. But there's another big change that just occurred because, of course, last session, you were a driving force behind H.R. 8, which would extend background checks to all gun sales. But of course, that died on Mitch McConnell's desk. But now Mitch McConnell is no longer the gatekeeper. And certainly many people are asking, will that change the political landscape on gun safety?
Most certainly it will. And the most important thing that we all have to remember is that, a large majority of Americans support common sense gun safety legislation. Over 90% of the Americans, in this country support this legislation, and they know that something must be done. And I'm sure after watching the insurrection at the Capitol, people know now more than ever that this gun culture has become too extremist. And no one seems to feel safe anymore. I even have some of my closest friends who, I would always advocate to them, don't buy a gun before, but now they're calling me and they're saying, look, I know what you've said before, but I don't feel safe, and I'm even considering buying my own firearm. But, we have a real opportunity now to protect families across the country. We really, really do. Now that we actually have some meat in the Senate with our two senators from Georgia, I might say, now we have a real opportunity to really make a difference. And unfortunately, as we have seen in the past, Mitch McConnell will use anything at his disposal to kind of grind down any progress that we've made and grind it to a halt. But it's as critical as ever that we continue to work together to pass these common sense solutions. As I've said over and over again, gun violence just isn't within our communities. It is in every facet of America now. And so we owe it to the American people to make sure that we are keeping them safe. That is their right. That's not a privilege. It's their right that they be able to walk in their own communities and be safe. And so it's a right that our children be able to go to school every single day and not be in fear of being gunned down. It's the right of a woman to not be abused or murdered by her domestic abuser. It's a right of a child to live in a home to have their parents securely put those arms and firearms away. So these are just common sense solutions that we've been fighting for a long time. Of course, John, all of the, organizing and mobilizing that has been done for such a long time now, and the armies of, volunteers and people that really are working hard to make sure that we're changing the culture. And I'm going to continue to have these conversations with my colleagues and have these conversations with leadership, Republicans and Democrats, about ending gun violence. Because what I say to my Republican colleagues is that, help me to keep you safe. Help me to keep you from ever feeling like you have to use your gun against someone that is not using their gun properly. And so, I'll continue to urge advocates and survivors and students and parents, everyone who doesn't want to live in fear of losing someone to gun violence. I'll keep talking to other representatives and at all levels of government, because this is something that has to be done. We have a public health crisis here with gun violence in America. And so we know that the vast majority of Americans, as we've said over and over again, support universal background checks, support closing the Charleston loophole. So I know that I'm going to do everything that I can to continue to champion this legislation. And I believe that together we're going to do this. We're going to end gun violence because lives are depending on it. And I think now that the country is ripe and ready for something to be done.
Lucy, when you mentioned Georgia, my mind immediately went back to the moment when you called me and told me that you wanted to run for Congress. And I was so excited, but you could hear in my voice, my sort of like, Lucy, I know where you live. You live in Georgia. Well, you showed me that I was wrong, and certainly 2020 really showed me I was wrong about my assumptions. So we all of us in the country, thank you for proving all of us doubters wrong about whether whether Georgia was red or blue.
Thank
So we're all in debt to you. Marco, one last question for you. The summer after your freshman year at Dartmouth, I know you went back to LA and you helped create the Summer Leadership Academy, which trains young people on how to become gun safety advocates. So tell us what's on tap for the Leadership Academy in 2021.
Yeah, thank you. So the Summer Leadership Academy is definitely, it's like my child, right? To me, that this summer program, you know, we've had, and I'll be honest, it was difficult to transition into a virtual program, right? Where the program by design is to create and foster a community around low-income students, people of color, and survivors of gun violence to learn how to become gun sense advocates, to become community organizers. And, you know, in working through the pandemic and realizing that, you know, while we can't meet in person, right, you know, the core part of the program and why this initiative really does matter is it's about the sense of community and being together with students. And so and we saw that in 2020 when we were able to expand to Nashville. And in 2021, I mean, we're expanding. We're not only continuing in Los Angeles and Nashville, offering virtual summer programs, we're also expanding to Tampa, Detroit, and Chicago, right? All key cities that that have communities that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence. We'll be providing, you know, we'll be hosting these programs virtually, and you know what that means is that we get to connect students from all over the country. And so I'm very optimistic that we're actually going to get a much higher quality trainings in, bringing in experts from all over the country and community partners that we couldn't have before. And then as soon as 2021 really 2021 is going to be setting the infrastructure so that when, you know, we're moving in a post-pandemic world, we can do some incredible social impact work and reduce gun violence in our own communities.
Well, that's incredibly exciting. And one thing I think that Lucy and I know from Gun Sense University is how important it is to give advocates the tools to be as sharp, as informed, and as effective as possible. So the work that you're doing, not just in LA, but Nashville and then Tampa and Chicago and other cities, I think is extraordinarily exciting. Lucy, one more political question I can't resist. As you know, the pandemic is making gun violence worse, whether we're talking about gun suicides, domestic violence shootings, or city gun violence, which is on the rise all over the country. But some people would say, you know, you just can't deal with two public health emergencies at once. You just got to concentrate on one thing at a time. But what's your response to people who say that?
No, I would say that it's imperative that we tackle both of these issues at the same time. Yes, we as Americans have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And there's no reason that we can't tackle both of them at the same time. Right now in America, you know, we're facing overlapping crises. This pandemic continues to just cause so much grief for so many people, and small businesses are struggling, workers are unemployed, and we're losing lives to gun violence. You know, these are real issues that are facing real people right now, and we must address it. You know, and of course, let's not forget about you know, the reports of large increases in illegal gun sales, especially last summer. And far too many dangerous people are actually falling, you know, through the cracks. There are a lot of people that are, you know, training and getting prepared. I don't know if it's for a civil war or whatever it is, but, you know, a lot of these extremist groups are growing and expanding and coming out of the woodwork. So it is imperative that we continue even with COVID, because COVID has actually exposed to the nation a lot of disparities. And so that, I believe, that kind of undergirds a lot of the anger and a lot of the violence that we're starting to see. So with that, because of COVID, I mean, we have to make sure that we are dealing with the gun crisis at the same time, gun violence at the same time. You know, far too many dangerous people are actually falling through the cracks and able to have access to guns and use guns, and they shouldn't be able to. So we've got to be able to take, you know, action to address all of these things, because at every day that we wait, you know, someone is losing their loved one. They're losing a parent. They're losing their child or friend or partner. So it's imperative that we do both.
Yeah, as you say, they're really inextricably tied to one another, and you really can't just ignore one and focus on the other. So, Lucy, thank you so much for joining us. You know, we are just so lucky to have you fighting for us in Washington, and as always, you are not just our representative, but you are a wonderful, loved, cherished member of the Everytown and Moms Demand Action family, and we'll never forget that. We'll never forget that. And Marco, really, thank you so much. You are not just the future of this movement. You are its presence also. The two of you are just making such a difference in the world. And I'd like to close really by letting everyone know how they can be part of Survivors Week. If you are a survivor, we invite you to add your story to Moments That Survive, and you can visit the site at momentsthatsurvive.org. You can also share your story on social media with the hashtag GV Survivors Week. But let me be clear, you don't have to be a survivor to participate, because we hope everyone will go online and repost the powerful stories of survivors. It's how you change America. And together we can put a face on the violence and the crisis of gun violence in America. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being with us, and have a great day.
Stay safe.